Today is April 2nd, 2024. This is episode 69 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. And as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the action from the second weekend, the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight. We're hoping to get another episode in this week with mostly transfer portal stuff and a Final Four preview, but if we have time, we'll definitely get to some of it today. So, Joe, we are going to start in the region that had the most dominant team in the tournament so far and the most dominant team all year. That's the East region. UConn gets by San Diego State by 30, and then what looked like a close game early against Illinois turned to be yet another rout for the Huskies. It's hard to see anybody competing with the Huskies, let alone beating them.
Yeah, Sean, I think Illinois especially, I thought in the first half, I don't even know how well I would describe them playing. I think they kind of survived, and that was the exact right word, because 5 minutes into the second half, we all saw the clips, we all saw the game. Illinois, by the way, a really good year, won the Big Ten tournament, got to the Elite Eight in the second weekend. Nothing to be ashamed of, because they ran into the absolute buzzsaw that is UConn. Overall, Sean, UConn is just better than Illinois. There's no reason to break this down position by position. I do think Illinois had to hit a few more jumpers and, to even give them a chance, but probably the result would have been the same. It just would have been delayed a little later. Like, UConn was always going to win that game by a lot, probably. I thought it would have been by, the mid part of the second half they take over. It's the last two games versus San Diego State and Illinois. It's not even been close, though. So, Dan Hurley, the carpenter, it is hard to see anyone stopping him right now.
Yeah, the Fighting Illini did have a good performance against Iowa State. I think that does need to be stated. They got to the Elite Eight for a reason. They're a good team. They were pretty much in the top 15 all year, and they fully just ran into something that they could not handle. Now, a couple of the quotes out of this kind of game, Brad Underwood did say before the game that he doesn't think the UConn does anything differently than what they've seen. Well, no team has done that to the Fighting Illini all year. And then Alex Karaban on UConn says, we know it's not normal to go back-to-back, but there's nobody normal in that locker room. UConn just plays a different game, it seems like, Joe. We talk about the kill shot from time to time, and teams that do get that kill shot typically win the game. But it seems like a lot of other teams maybe try and feel out the opponent, try and not get to halftime, but maybe just see where they're at halftime and reassess. UConn fully expects to try and win the game in the first half, and many times they do.
Yeah, and if not, it's just within the first 3 minutes of the second half. So I think UConn, too, I want to give them a lot of credit. They've been good the whole year, but they clearly have gotten a lot better. Even from February, the Creighton game's pretty easy to point out, but I think that was just a blip on the radar, and quite frankly, after the first 15 minutes of that game, I don't think UConn gave in the effort they knew was necessary. And can't really say I blame them. It didn't cost them much of anything. So, Sean, I am just genuinely baffled how UConn nationally does not get the attention. Like, they're getting it now, but even toward last year and into this year, we definitely talk about it in the college basketball universe. But nationally, if this was college football or if this was UNC or Duke, this would be covered on a much larger scale.
Yeah, for sure. And they have only 3 losses on the year, all 3 on the road. One of them at Kansas, another one at Seton Hall. That was the game that Donovan Clingan did get injured in. So obviously the game plan kind of goes out the door when something like that happens. And then they lose at Creighton when Creighton had, all cylinders firing. So they haven't been particularly close since maybe Big East semi against St. John's, but the Red Storm really made a ton of shots to stay in that one. Never felt like they were going to win it. But if UConn plays in a close game, that's not something that they're used to, and it's because they're winning by so much. But perhaps that is a storyline that we can get to down the stretch. They do win the East region. Many people's picks, the number 1 overall seed gets there. We're going to go to the Midwest now, Joe. Friday, Sunday. And it started off with a Purdue 12-point win over Gonzaga. Very predictable how this game went. Purdue just a better team than the Zags. And then Tennessee gets by Creighton, and then in the Elite Eight, Purdue beats Tennessee in what was a rematch from an earlier Maui Invitational game this year. But the Boilers get over the hump, Joe. First Final Four since 1980.
Yeah, really good on Purdue. I think Tennessee had multiple chances in this game to get close and to take the lead, and I think Tennessee played a really good game. Just overall, you can't go those stretches without scoring and hitting jumpers against Purdue, especially when they have an automatic 2 points in Zach Edey or automatic get to the foul line, which I have acknowledged plenty of times this year is getting ridiculous. But you knew what you were going to face. I'm taking nothing away from Purdue. Tennessee just didn't had too many lapses offensively, and for a team that was their strength all year, they got away from that, and it ended up costing them their season. And I don't think anyone is that shocked because Purdue is a team you need to bring your A game against. Every team that's beat them this year has done just that. And besides UConn, I think the rest of these teams are going to need that, especially NC State. But Sean, what were your thoughts?
I think Purdue got lucky that they won this game. Not because they weren't the better team, they are the better team, but it was there for the taking for Tennessee. You had 32 points from not Zach Edey, and they were 11 for 32 from the field, not Zach Edey. So when you get that, you're going to have a chance to win, but when you only go 38% from the field, Dalton Knecht did have 37 points, but it was on 31 field goals. So not incredibly efficient there. Not horrible, but not incredibly efficient. And then, you can turn the not Zach Edey with not Dalton Knecht. And Tennessee only had 10 field goals, 10 for 31 without their star. So the role players did not play very well in this one. And that typically is, that is the ceiling definer. How can your role players play? The star players will show up every game they have all year. Can you get Braden Smith? Can you get Fletch? Can you get Lance Jones? Two of those three to have a good game, maybe, and you're going to have a chance to win. But I think Purdue was lucky that they got this performance from Tennessee because the Volunteers could have won this game. But not going to remember that in 30 years when you're looking back at this Final Four run. Purdue was up there all year. They heard all the noise. They had all the demons from previous years, and Joe, they get another double-digit seed in the Final Four. Creighton, Tennessee, this game was a pretty good one on Friday. Neck and neck either way down the stretch. Tennessee did make a couple shots in this one, but anything from this one that you want to add? Because sometimes a team that does win in the Sweet 16 and lose in the Elite Eight does go a little bit under the radar, but this one was probably one of the better matchups of the Sweet 16, and it definitely proved it.
Yeah, I think Creighton, too many missed opportunities, especially at the end. The missed layups, and especially the Kalkbrenner at the very end had a wide open dunk with 2.5 minutes. I'm not going to blame him for the loss. Just lapses in judgment like that, especially when the teams played so closely and you come all the way back. Margin for error, especially in this tournament in that region, was very slim. And for Purdue, this is the ultimate compliment. That's what we worried about them doing the entire year, especially on In a Nutshell, Sean. We talked about it since September. Will Purdue finally not get in their own way? And I don't think they played amazingly well in any of these games. I think they played better against Gonzaga than they did Tennessee, in my opinion. What I would say, though, is they just failed. They did not get in their own way. And for as good a team as Purdue is, that's all it would take to get to the Final Four. And I don't say that because it was not a light matter at all.
Yeah, these are the sorts of games that Purdue might lose. Even earlier this year, Tennessee shot poorly from the field, but they made threes. When the other team is making threes, Purdue's not making their free throws. Stuff happens, but not here. They got over the hump.
Yeah, and really good on the Boilermakers. First Big Ten team. I do want to shout this out in the Final Four since 2019 Michigan State. They're one win away from being the first team since 2018 to play in the title game, which was the Michigan Wolverines. And the reason I mentioned that, Sean, is this is the first time the Big Ten has had this kind of success. I don't mean a massive, just any kind of success getting into the last weekend since before COVID. So I think a lot of Big Ten country, I don't know if they're completely behind the Boilermakers, but they do watch with great intrigue to see if they could finally finish the story off. But definitely two massive games to go for them. So
And they'll be playing NC State, Joe, who have had a crazy month ish right here. They ended off the regular season on a 4-game losing streak. I had to make sure it was 4. All good teams that they did lose to. We talked about their ACC tournament run. We talked about how we probably think that they're better than Texas Tech at the time. They beat them. They get a little bit lucky avoiding the 3 seed. But this second weekend, Joe, they played some pretty exceptional basketball. None that we've seen from the Wolfpack this year. They beat Marquette. They hold the Golden Eagles to just 58 points on 33% shooting. And they turn around and win what has become the rubber match against Duke. And another great defensive effort with the Blue Devils shooting 32% from the field. So NC State, 5 games in 5 days. They win those. 9 wins in a row for the Wolfpack. Obviously, the run is great, but how about these 2 performances in the second weekend here?
I think the Duke, if you look at the stat line alone, I think Jared McCabe scoring 32 is a little deceptive. He was the only one who did next to anything efficiently offensively. He was 5 of 11 from 3. The rest of the team 0 of 9. 5 of 20 from 3 shot. And that is pretty remarkable because 5 of 20, you think that's a pretty good defense performance. But then when you put that into account, that's all, like, that is an all-time performance in terms of NC State standards. Every shot that Duke took, they looked extremely uncomfortable, especially toward the second half. Because let's face it, this Duke team, they do have plenty of veterans. They do have Roach, and having a guy like that is really good. But most of their younger guys haven't been in that moment, Sean, and you could see it kind of start to get up to them. And I'm not saying NC State wasn't nervous, but everyone knows NC State's playing with house money. They've been playing with house money since the end of the ACC tournament. You see with DJ Bird's dancing, you would think he's in a Harlem Globetrotters game at some of these moments. So with all that said, Sean, I think the pressure got to Duke, and NC State did a really good job on defense, making sure that all the circumstances, the outside pressure, being the favorite, I would say extremely aggressive, hands in the face, everything as such, and complete denial of the 3. That got to Duke. They missed some contested shots, and they missed some open shots. And NC State really, I really thought NC State had this game for most of the second half, Sean, just based on that.
So, Joe, before we get to NC State, I want to talk about Duke. They did beat Houston in the Sweet 16, perhaps ending the soft rumors. Jamal Shed did get hurt, missed most of the game. It was a total rock fight, ugly game. They did get by Houston, though. So were you at least impressed with them in that one, or do you kind of completely write it off considering Houston's best player and the Big 12 Player of the Year didn't have any impact?
I think you take that into account, but you don't write it off either. Duke in that game made some huge shots. Roach in particular, I really want to highlight him, Sean. I think he carried them through the last part of that Sweet 16 game. And overall, I do give a lot of credit to Shire. I know expectations following Coach K are completely unrealistic, but I think they had a really good year. I think this tournament run, they did get a bit lucky avoiding some really good teams, but they did Houston with or without Snead doesn't really matter to me. You beat a 1 seed, you lose in the Elite 8. That is progress. I do think next year the pressure is going to be overwhelming to get to a Final Four. But for this year, I would give Shire a pretty good grade. I think it's still pretty fresh coming off their season ending. But, Sean, I do think they addressed a good amount of the soft rumors, but they are not quite the team they need to be yet to compete nationally. For Duke standards, plenty of talent, maybe get some more experience, and Lord knows they'll have a lot of talent next year. So it'll be interesting to see what else Shire does this offseason and into the beginning of next year.
Shire's a decent coach. Now he may have been born on third base, as your folk like to say, but he's a solid coach. They were not a good team last year for part of the year, but he got them together and into the tournament as a 5 seed, and then this year too, clear flaws in the team, a clear weakness, and they still get a 4 seed into the Elite Eight. So I think Jon Scheyer will be there for a while, and he's a pretty solid coach. Now, this game, Joe, between NC State and Duke was the clear opposites of the college basketball landscape. You had NC State, who have basically 7 players in their rotation, and really none of them have started at NC State. They have all transferred in. Now, Duke, of their 8 players who were in the rotation for this game, just 1 was a transfer, and that was Ryan Young, pretty much just playing backup 5 to Kyle Filipowski. So a team entirely built from the transfer portal has beaten a team with just 1 transfer, and Duke was about as experienced as they ever have been. Now, you had Roach, who's the senior, as you mentioned earlier, Joe, but the 2 sophomores at Duke who start, those are probably considered as veteran as they get typically with the mostly one-and-dones. Now, you have Filipowski going 3 of 12 and Proctor going 0 for 9. I know they're just sophomores, but you have to expect a little bit more out of non-freshmen, especially those 2 who will probably go in the first round of the NBA draft.
Yeah, I think you get into the never-ending debate. We talked about this with Calipari. I do think Scheyer, for all his credit, I think we both agree on this. It was his second year. I think he will learn from this, and I do think if you asked him in his mind that they would get to the Elite Eight, I think he would call that overachieving, even at the beginning of this tournament. So I do think it's unfortunate for Duke faithful that they lost to NC State, a team that probably if they play 10 more times, Sean, I think Duke would win a majority of those. So it's just a very tough pill to swallow, but I think it should not erase anything that any of the coaching jobs Scheyer did or what they accomplished by getting to the Elite Eight.
There's a real chance, Joe, that all 5 of Duke's starters are, are leaving. Maybe Mark Mitchell stays. He's probably the most likely, but you think the other 4 are probably going. Roach does have another year of eligibility if he wants, but the other 3, McCain, Proctor, and Filipowski, almost certainly going to the NBA. So Scheyer might have to reinvent the roster a little bit here, which is not entirely surprising in the age of the transfer portal, but, it's not something he's had to do before. We'll go over to NC State. They're playing defense. They're playing much slower. They realize in the half court that they can get a really good shot every time down the floor from DJ Burns. So they're slowing this game down. It's been a clear change of pace from Kevin Keatts, and they are clearly playing as well as any team in the country right now, but never thought I'd say it, but Kevin Keatts with some pretty good coaching adjustments, and they're just rolling here. Like you said, didn't ever seem like they were going to lose this game in the second half.
Not even close, Sean. You could tell Duke's bench, the whole nerve of, and I know this is kind of a BS thing to detect, Duke started to panic, and NC State had 0 of that in their DNA, so I do think that matters. These guys are still like our age or younger, so they are human too. And NC State, the fact they play with this much house money, I can't think of a team, Sean, and I know, we could look at FAU, we could look at some of these other Cinderellas, but truly, NC State, I've never seen a team play this loose ever in a tournament. Can you remember, Sean?
No, especially considering their last 9 games have been elimination games. And it doesn't seem like it. The body language is very evident for anybody who's watching closely that NC State truly believes that they're going to win every time they step on the floor. Now, when they were 17-14 last month, and in the depths of the high 70s, 80s in Ken Palm, they were not a good basketball team. But they've jumped over 40 spots in defensive efficiency alone. Their half-court offense is extremely efficient, and we'll see where they go from here. Purdue will be tough, and we'll get into the preview later, the matchups and who will be guarding who. But just less than a month ago, in the month of March, Joe, they hosted Duke. and got punked by them. They turned around, beat them in the tournament, in the ACC tournament, and then again in the NCAA tournament. So Duke had 2 chances to send them home. I wouldn't say they're main rivals, but certainly, maybe a little bit of rivalry there being in the same state. They had 2 chances to send them home. They failed both times. So the Wolfpack certainly winning the mentality war here. Now we're going to our last region, Joe, and that would be the West region. Definitely not team that we expected to come out of here. I would think that the 2 Sweet 16 games were won by the team wearing the road jersey, and I thought both the other teams were going to win. We had Clemson beating Arizona, turned into a little bit of a chuck-off with some pretty awful shots, but the Tigers get across the line, and they beat Caleb Love in Arizona.
Sean, I am genuinely surprised. I picked New Mexico to go all the way to the Final Four. Probably my worst take ever after the role I was on last year. I think Clemson deserves a lot of credit for this run. I think the way they ended the season fooled a lot of people into picking against them, including not a lot, most of the country and most college basketball observers too in Vegas. They were
dogs to the bows. Yep.
Yeah. So really good on Clemson and really good contribution from their bench. I know it wasn't like all world numbers, but having 3 guys off the bench in college basketball to just give you a few points here and there, Clemson did that every time, and we didn't see a whole lot of other teams. I know Arizona did do that, but Sean, I want to talk about Arizona. Is it genuinely shocking how 2, I think, pretty good coaches in a row haven't yet solved the Final Four issue? I know Lloyd's still pretty early on in his tenure, but do you think it speaks to a bigger problem there, or is it just a one-off overreaction?
I mean, maybe. Tommy Lloyd has been at Arizona for 3 years. He's been a 1 seed, a 2 seed, a 2 seed. And he's won 4 games, I think, or 3.
3.
You got to win more games than that. And I think 3 is a pattern, Joe. I think it is. And if they do end up going on the run, I think that will be more of the outlier than the rule. We saw Shaka Smart go to the Final Four with VCU early on in his career, see a ton of March failure after that, including this year, honestly, them losing to NC State. But
totally.
I think this team might not have a March problem, but the body language was evident in this game. It just seemed like they had no plan on offense. And Clemson's not a defense that really makes teams do that very often. They're not a Houston. They're not a team that does anything wild defensively and on 4 days prep. It's not the second day of a 2 in 3. I was disappointed with Tommy Lloyd in this one. Caleb Love more times than not, unfortunately, if you're going to put the game in his hands like that. I know he did it with North Carolina a couple years ago, but he's probably not going to go off the way that they needed him to here, and Clemson moved on. But in the other one, Joe, Alabama gets by the Tar Heels. Grant Nelson with a 24 and 12 performance. Mark Sears has been really good in this tournament, but they get past the Tar Heels here with a second half resurgence. How about this one from Bama?
I think bigger picture of the big picture guy of this podcast. I really do believe Alabama's offensive approach has been all but validified in this tournament. Nate Oates has been often doubted. I know there's other reasons for that, and we don't have to get into that. But Sean, if you're a UNC fan, especially a negative one, do you feel anything but validated based on that performance in one night by both Caleb Love and RJ Davis?
I mean, maybe, Joe. I think North Carolina probably wins this game more times than not. And Davis has typically been more reliable than Caleb Love. But you got a 4 of 20 day from your guy, and you still just lose by 2. I think this is an RJ Davis thing. 0 for 9 from 3. I mean, you had Ingram with 12, Bakeout with 19, Cadeau with 8 in 13 minutes, Cormac Ryan with 17. Everyone else kind of did their job. And you got, 15 points off the bench. This was on RJ Davis for me. You don't want to bury somebody who's already down, but Alabama did their thing. I don't think they shocked North Carolina in this one, but, you know, um, Davis has been so good all year, first team All ACC player um, for multiple years now, but unfortunately, this is the way that he's going to go out. And I think that it was a tough day for that 2022 North Carolina team because both of their guys really, really let their teams down.
1,000%, Sean. And for all the what ifs out there, for all the Caleb Love would have went to Missouri, would have went to Michigan. I do ultimately think he would have elevated those teams, but to say he would have done anything north of the Sweet 16, and this isn't to bury Caleb Love, it's just to speak to you need a lot more pieces than that problem. Uh, I think this display showed that. So
Yeah. So it was the Crimson Tide who moved on, perhaps getting lucky that they got to face Clemson, but they took care of business here. They were winning for most of this one, not by a ton, but they do take down the Tigers 89-82. Sears again leading the way. He hit 7 threes this time. Pringle gets the double-double in the Elite Eight. And then Stevenson drops 19 off the bench here. Alabama's doing their thing, and nobody seems like that they can stop it.
no, and one thing in this game that I really want to highlight is Alabama rebounds when they have to. They're not particularly the greatest rebounding team you'd ever see, but in the clutch, in this game, Sean, they got down and dirty, and even on balls they didn't originally get. They're not afraid to scrap. They're not afraid to hack. You could argue maybe they got away with one or two, but their mindset is there. And if I'm a youth coach, I wouldn't go this. Maybe I should go this far, but I will. The last 5 minutes of that game, Alabama seemed like they were losing the way they were going after balls. Clemson, I'm not even saying a lack of effort. Alabama just had a different intensity. And that's not something NATO's teams are normally known for. It's their offensive firepower. It's their analytics-based offense, which, now I think a lot more coaches are going to implement. So, all that said, Sean, Alabama proved that they're a team, not only talent-wise, that deserves to be in the Final Four, but in terms of getting to that next year, they definitely proved they have it. Is that going to be enough to beat UConn? I assume not, but the first Final Four in Alabama history, one of the few schools. Now, Sean, one of 5 schools to make a Final Four and college football playoff in the college football playoff era of college sports. Really good on Alabama. Really good job on Nate Oates, local guy, coached at Romulus High. So, yeah, I think he silenced a lot of people, Sean, and I think for the SEC, it's maybe a little shocking that a team like Tennessee and Kentucky wasn't the SEC represented this year. You probably would have put Alabama 3rd or 4th, even behind Florida, who a lot of people picked to go on a surprise run.
Bama, over the course of the season, their numbers great. They're graded out well. The analytical model is supposed to, you see it in baseball too. It's supposed to even out over the course of the entire season, not necessarily be sort of the in the one game elimination setting. Usually that doesn't track, but it is here. Perhaps they did get lucky with their Elite Eight matchup, but they beat the number 1 seed in the region, and they beat the team that beat the number 2 seed in the region. So, and 3 actually. So, you can only beat who's in front of you. This analytical style is very similar to Indiana State's model, Joe, and they're 8 minutes away from going to the NIT championship games. So, everyone has been talking about how the mid-range shot is not good and doesn't track. Well, it's hard to ignore that now for those hanging on to dear life. Threes, layups, and free throws is the way that you score at an efficient rate. And, you could also, they could play a little better defense. They still do not grade out very well on that end, but at this time, they're still playing. So, Oates' his journey in a short time has been thoroughly covered, from high school math teacher to Final Four coach in less than 10 years. And they will be facing off against UConn in Game 2. Purdue, NC State will be Game 1. 6:09 Eastern Time for Game 1, and then 25 minutes after Game 1 ends for Game 2, roughly 8:45. So, Joe, before we get into the matchups, we're at 30 minutes here. So I think we're going to keep the transfer portal stuff to next time. But I'll ask you one question. NIT semifinals at Hinkle Fieldhouse. These teams have all won a bunch of games. These teams all want to be here. A lot of hoopla went around the NIT and all those teams that declined the invite. But if you've watched the NIT, Joe, the quality of basketball is better when the players want to be there. And I think that's pretty clear from this year's NIT.
Yeah, Sean, I'm not going to lie. I've not watched much of the NIT. I think I've watched Ohio State a few times in it, not really since they've been eliminated. I do think there is an angle for it, as we've said. If you're a young team, I really think you should go into it, especially as you develop. But to some of these coaches, Sean, they have no idea if this team's going to be their team next year. And I think it speaks to a greater problem. But to a team like Indiana State, who really bought in, and maybe they treat the NIT a lot more seriously than a high major program. Like certainly Michigan last year didn't take it seriously, in Wisconsin. It is still. I honestly, I want to hear your take on this. I think it's kind of like a next season starting already kind of deal. It's kind of like a bowl, like a non-major bowl game where you really just want to showcase your younger players. And to some teams, it's a huge deal, but to others, it's probably just another practice run. What's your take?
Yeah, I've liked the games that I've watched. I've watched a bunch of the Seton Hall games. They're still playing hard. The Indiana State, I watched the first half against Utah at Hinkle. They packed that thing. Hinkle was sold out, only about an hour and plus from Terre Haute. It's good to see that side of it, but these teams are now putting themselves at a disadvantage for the portal. Now, you can always reach out to players and have them for visits, and we saw some players have visits with the team at their tournament site, but I think it's a great sign for basketball, Joe, if the portal deadline moves to Championship Monday. Because these teams are now at no disadvantage. They're going to be done Thursday. But there are some teams, Joe, have been done for 2+ weeks who have gotten a head start on the portal. So I think, Indiana State, some of those players are going to leave. It's just the nature of the game. And perhaps they are bumping up their pay stub a little bit with these NIT performances, but they're putting Josh Schertz at a pretty big disadvantage for building his roster for next year, because they've already been quite a few players go to and commit to their new schools. Now, I want to talk about 3 before we wrap up here today, Joe. Mm-hmm. The first 2, Riley Kugel, Zeke Mayo to Kansas. Bill Self said he's been thinking about next year for a while now. He's going to get KJ Adams back, DeJuan Harris back, Hunter Dickinson status still up in the air. But Kansas reloading with some good transfers.
Sean, I think Bill Self is probably, of all the guys who were considered probably the top coaches in the 2010s, Calipari, Jay Wright, now retired, Izzo, Coach K, Bill Self. Overall, I know a lot of those guys have since retired. He's adapted. Of those 5, probably the best, I would say, using the transfer portal. I know Calipari used it in the past, but Bill Self is ahead of his time in the sense that he's not afraid to make changes. He doesn't like them. Like Tom Izzo's quote, he does not like the portal. Doesn't mean he won't use it, but action speaks louder than words, and Tom hasn't used it yet, and I really think he's got to look at a coach like Bill Self to understand that this is the way it goes. And if you look at all these teams now, Sean, especially into the second weekend, I mean, we even mentioned NC State. With the exception of maybe a Duke, just look at Alabama's team too, Mark Sears. They're guys from the portal. They're not immediate impact guys, but in Sears' case, they're guys that have developed 2-3 years there, and now they're shining for their school. So I do think Self has it figured out. I'm not going to declare Kansas a Final Four team for 2025 already, but I'm just more impressed that he's not backed down from this, and it's not going to shock me at all if they're not done yet.
And he's actually lost quite a few. In the early days of the portal, he lost Quentin Grimes, he lost Marcus Sasser. He's lost some solid players. But he built this team from the portal this year, not entirely, but mostly. And, they still got a 4 seed. They were not a very good team this year, especially down the stretch. He needs to get credit for winning a game with that squad in the tournament. And, they've reached out to Cliff and Morey from Rutgers. You would think that if Hunter goes, he comes in, and if Hunter stays, Bill tells Cliff to go somewhere else. So, they're going to be loaded again. They're going to have talent. They're going to have freshmen. They're going to have high transfers. They have the best fans in the country. They have the best home whistle in the country. Like, this thing is, if this is the down year, a 4 seed, a protected seed, they're in for a pretty good future. Not that was ever really in doubt, but the Big 12 gets stronger. You don't have to have a crazy record. They're barely over 500 this year, and they still get that protected seed. So continue to win 60% of your games in the Big 12, and they're going to be a problem in the future. Now, the last transfer I'm going to talk about here, Joe, today is a yo-yo transfer. And for those who you don't know, player transfers out, play a year at their new school, and then they transfer back. Now, we've seen quite a few of these, but not very many in the manner of Michi Johnson, who is going back to Ohio State, where he started his career. He then transferred down to Lamont Paris in South Carolina, had an excellent year, and he is now transferring back to Ohio State in Jake Diebler. Now, the yo-yo transfers typically are players in the mid-majors who transfer up to high major and don't quite cut it, so they go back. You've seen Peyton Sparks, Tanner Holden, Kevin Marfo, a couple more, not off the top of my head, but you don't see somebody transfer down and then back up typically. So what about this move for Jake Diebler in Ohio State?
You can't say anything, but it's a really good move, Sean. It's kind of like a loan in soccer. Player goes out on loan. Did I say that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's essentially what happened here. And you can make comments about Chris Holtman and whatnot. I'm more interested to see what's going on with Roddy Gale and Akpara. And
Akpara's back. He announced today.
Akpara's back?
Yep.
Yeah.
So Battle's the only one who has to leave from that team, other than Bonner, I think. But, yeah.
Yeah.
They could run it back with Michi Johnson.
Yeah, I think with that, Ohio State, again, I thought they were going to be good this year. They really were, Sean. I think, firing Holtman, we could get to that debate later. But
outside of a 4-week stretch, they're a pretty good basketball team this year.
Yeah, so adding Michi, I know losing Battle is going to hurt some scoring, but Michi there should contribute for most of that. It's going to be interesting to see if they do lose anyone, just the nature of college sports in general, if that's never going to be ruled out. Yeah, I think Ohio State, I'm not going to pick them to win the Big Ten. I'm not going to be melodramatic. There's no reason this team can't make the tournament, though, next year, Sean. I'm giving that like a 10 to 20% chance. Like, there's no reason they should not make the tournament.
And, Joe, they've beaten 2 of the 4 teams that are left. They beat Purdue. They beat Alabama. If Diebler's keeping this team together, then that hire is a lot better than it was when it happened. Everyone kind of assumed that Thornton and Gale and Akpara would move on. But Diebler ends up getting the job. They've been done for a while. A couple weeks now. They lost maybe a week. I think it's been a week. They won a couple games
Georgia,
in the NIT.
Yeah. Lost to Georgia in the NIT.
You would think if they're in the portal, they would have been already. But they're not. So if he can keep that core together, obviously adding Michi, one of the best players in the portal. There's another rather big name from USC that just went into the portal. Maybe you can get him. There's going to be opportunities for Ohio State to be a good basketball team next year in what is going to be a pretty uncertain Big Ten, Joe, because you have Zach Edey leaving from Purdue. How do the Boilers look? You've got Illinois losing some players. Coleman, Shannon probably to the draft. Danger in the portal. The Fighting Illini are going to look a lot different. And then you have Michigan State losing essentially their entire starting lineup. And you have Wisconsin losing A.J. Storr and a couple of their players. So I think, not 11 or 12 of the 15 players in the Big Ten first, second, and third team are not going to be there next year. So the Big Ten is wide open next year. And who knows?
Sean, let me just mention this. I've been following for some of the people who are going to watch the recording of this, and maybe I haven't been as locked in. I think Ohio State's pursuit the portal, I know Michi was just a guy they previously had. I think it's directly tied to Michigan spending a lot of money. It's just breaking down, Sean. I think Mike Boynton, the Oklahoma State former head coach, will join Michigan staff. So that's been developing the past 20 minutes in Michigan circles. So the fact that a school that's pretty hesitant to spend on NIL and anything besides football and hockey, they're starting to do it now, and you can see Ohio State's taking notice of it. So, uh, frankly, credit to Ohio State, credit to these other Big Ten teams, particularly Illinois. There is a rumor that a certain Wisconsin and St. John's former basketball player could be going there. Wink, wink. So, it's going to be mayhem. I think Sean and I talked before recording this. We might have to do one like in general for college basketball. There's a chance we might have to do one for the Big Ten in general. You could write a whole book about it at this stage, and we're only April 2nd. So, oh,
Yeah, you have Nebraska, too, losing most of their roster to transfers or graduation. You have Minnesota, who everyone thought they'd kind of step into the Nebraska role from this year. They're losing a lot of players in the transfer portal. So, off the top of my head, Joe, I don't think that there's a team that's going to be returning a lot of their core next year. And, Indiana with 3 starters coming back might be the most.
yeah, Sean.
I mean, Purdue could return 3 also, but I think missing Edey is probably, bigger than just a single player. But the Big Ten is open, wide open as of now. Obviously, there's still more games to play this year. Get to transfer portal and our in-depth Final Four preview next time. But that's all we have for them today. So thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe and like the Instagram too. I will see you soon.